Welcome back, everyone. This is Brian Smith bringing you another edition of the Daily Night. Going to cover a little UCF football perspective on the defense today. Going to talk about the team in terms of the first three games, what they have not done, what they need to accomplish moving forward, how that relates to Navy, all of that wrapped into one. So with that, a couple of quick notes to start. This is a perspective based on the following. Stats don't lie. This is what you've done. Now, there are different scenarios that go with it, and I'll certainly highlight those as I move through this. But there are some areas that are glaring concerns that I'm going to talk about, and I'm not very much for going around things. I'm A to B. So if you need all positivity, this will not be the podcast for you today. I am point blank, and I'm not very happy with what I'm seeing here about the defense. So it is what it is. I'm just going to start at the top and kind of move down. The things that I like, I don't like, etc. will come into play, but basic statistics need to be mentioned first. So let's just kind of knock those out right off the bat. Number one, national. These are all the rankings. I'll give them based on the NCAA for each stat that I mentioned, and we'll kind of go through some of them and discuss one by one. Points per game allowed. They are 92nd at 29. This isn't really shocking considering how poorly they played against Louisville. They played bad. No ifs, no ands, no buts. They played bad. You can't give up 42 points and say it was even a mediocre performance. It was bad. They didn't do the main things they needed to do. They didn't contain the quarterback in the pocket, let him get outside. They didn't tackle quite as well as they should. It wasn't terrible. Excuse me. But that was not a good performance. Considering how well they had performed in games 1 and 2, and I know Bethune doesn't have a ton of talent and they dominated, but still, they were pretty sound. It was alarming what I saw and going back through some of the film. They need to change that post-haste or they're going to lose some more games that, quite frankly, they should not because they have more talent than the other teams. It's just honest. It's just honest. This is the one that's bizarre, and I don't know how to put it into perspective, and part of that's because they've only played 3 games. Again, scenario is very much a part of stats. 2-3 games in any football season at any level, high school, college, or pro. UCF rushing defense. They're 13th in the nation, which is very good. 78.3 yards per game. However, Bethune didn't even try to run the football. They didn't even try. They knew they couldn't. And they had a good quarterback. They dinked and dunked UCF to death. Their quarterback was, as far as just being a passer, was the best pure passer of the 3 teams they played. Not even close. Very accurate young man. But against Louisville, again, in a lot of key situations, they didn't do very well. 1st and 10, they get off to a good start, etc. Now, their third down D has been good in some circumstances, like Louisville, I believe, was 5 of 15 and still scored all those points. So that shows you the chunk plays they gave up by not getting contained. But I digress. UCF does a good job with run fits overall. The Louisville game is just, it's such an anomaly compared to the first 2. I don't know how to even grade it. Louisville has a pretty good scheme, and they are paying all the things that I said leading up to the game came to fruition, unfortunately. You gotta adjust because in college football, you see vastly different defenses week to week. If you don't believe me, they're playing Navy this weekend. There is no more complex pain in the rear end. We don't want to play against this. It's awful defensive situation to what they're going into to play Navy. The triple option is horrendous to play against. If UCF does not adjust, and Navy showed in signs of improvement against Houston in that second half, they were awful their first 2 games. Just absolutely terrible. Full disclosure, terrible. They're averaging 10 points a game. But in the second half, they kind of got things going. They had some moments. Their sophomore quarterback's a really good athlete. He's starting to figure it out. If they give him an early start in that game, and, this 78.3 is going to balloon after the 4th game, I guarantee it. Navy's going to run for more than 78 yards because all thing they do is run. That's fine. But you need to keep them around 200 yards or less, and they can't pass for anything. I mean, they can't have any chunk touchdowns, any flea flickers. They're going to run a junk play at some point. It's easy to do off the option. Throw it to the guy out to the right on option, then he throws a pass. It's hard. That's why playing this offense is no fun. And I do not in any way, shape, or form feel good for the coaches at UCF this week, because nobody wants to prepare for this. It's terrible. But you're in the American Athletic Conference, so is Navy. So the thing I want to see this week is much like it was against Boise State. That was probably the most complete, because Boise had a pretty darn good running back. After the first quarter, I mean, UCF just completely dismantled them. They adjusted. Their run fits were better. Tatum Bethune and everybody else was coming into their gaps the way they should. Khalil played well. Big Cat sealed the edge. All the things that you look for as a team defense. UCF did that against Navy, although it is a completely different scheme. If you do not contain, I'm going to say this probably about 10 times this year leading into games based on the types of teams they're playing. If you do not contain at the edges, meaning the DNs over the tackles, etc., you're going to be gashed, because Navy is going to dink and dunk you in their version of it. That doesn't mean pass with Navy. That means the fullback dive and then the fullback lead with the quarterback coming behind it. I don't know what Navy calls it. It's basically a quarterback draw or quarterback run, quarterback counter. They've got about 10 different versions of it. I want to try to pronounce this right. Ken Niamatoloa is the head coach there. He's as good an option coach as there is in the world. He's been in Navy a long time. He knows how to scheme for any particular game. When they play a team that is definitively better than they are, one thing that he almost always does, and coaches lie about this all the time, oh, we treat everybody the same. Garbage. They do not. He's going to put in something different that he has not run in the first X number of games. If they play a super team in game 8, first 7 games, they're not going to run something. He's going to run it 5 times in game 8. It'll be the same thing this week against UCF. Too bad, adjust on the fly. Every big game has something like that. They're going to have a reverse. They're going to run a different version of the option where the quarterback spins one way, comes back. They're going to do something to throw you off. Every little yard counts, because if it ends up being a close game, a field goal or a field position situation could be dictated by that adjustment or lack thereof. I want to see how UCF adjusts to whatever it is. I'm just going to call him Ken. It's easier to say that. The head coach at Navy, Ken, he is tremendous at coming up with schemes. So the rushing defense, while it's been good, it's kind of bizarre because of Bethune-Cookman, 78.3 yards. I want to see if they adjust to what he comes up with. And if he doesn't, Navy should get suffocated. They do not have the guys to block Kalia. And even if Ricky doesn't play, we have no idea if Ricky Barber plays, and that changes the game. It does. Very good football player, and you can't teach 310 pounds. That's also another full disclosure. He's very good. But when he came out against Louisville, they just collapsed. They did. They weren't as, well, maybe not collapsed. They were really close to collapse. They gave up too many gash plays, 4 to 6 yards, stuff like that. They didn't play consistent up front. You have to have depth. You have to have guys step up. Give credit to Louisville by all means, but they're not that good up front. They're so inconsistent on their O-line. The guys in the booth that were for the Louisville side that run all the different Louisville sites in the newspaper were just ragging on the offensive line the entire day leading into the game and the week. The people I talked to, every single person in some way, shape, or form beat up on the line, and then they did a good job against UCF. That is not a good sign. That is not a good sign. Passing. This one is a little bit skewed, kind of like the rushing is, because UCF did so well in game 1 against Boise. I believe they held them to like 20 yards rushing. Teams just throw the ball. That's one of the things they do. If we can't do one thing, we do the other. Well, Bethune didn't have the bodies to throw the football, or run the football against UCF. They just didn't. So they threw it every down pretty much. They only had 13 carries. UCF kind of gets the raw end of the deal here. I'm going to give them a little bit of a pass. They're ranked 113th with 276 yards allowed per game. That's a bad number, obviously. It's really bad. But I need to see them through about game 6 where this is going to be kind of balanced. And to a certain degree, maybe just this game, because Navy's not going to throw it more than probably 5 times. If they throw it more than 5, that means UCF is up 28-3 in the second quarter, and then it doesn't matter. I don't care how many yards you give up. But that's something they need to do. I want to look at one more stat here. This is something UCF has done a pretty good job of keeping things in front of them for the most part, but every now and then they give up a play. The other thing that has been a little bit frustrating is interceptions. I think that Lester is a player that, quite frankly, might be UCF's best ball defender, meaning when the ball's in the air. Dylan has played some free safety this year. He was a nickelback last year. He's a junior out of the Miami area. Good football player, but we need more guys making plays like that. With Corey Thornton banged up against Louisville, this puts a lot of things in question. Does Dylan move to corner? Again, I mean, he's played it before. And if he does, who plays safety? What is your rotation? There is no college football team, Georgia, Alabama, Clemson, Ohio State, Notre Dame, USC, etc., included, that has enough corners. 0 teams have enough corners. You have to be around coaches and understand scheme and a lot of really ridiculous insider stuff to understand that. And if you've played, you might have some idea too, but you can never have enough corners. And what I mean by that is guys ready to play now, not potential. Not potential. I mean, NFL level corners. And there's about, in my opinion, and I'm a really picky guy grading film, there are about 20 guys in the world that are really good at corner. That means not even all the NFL teams have a really good corner. It's just true. It's not natural to run backwards. It's not. There are a lot of guys that are capable. That's different. UCF has size. They have some experience now, but they're not getting it done. They only have 1 pick from a defensive back, and that's Dylan. Had a really nice play. I believe that was the Boise game. But Dylan is one guy. They need 2 or 3 guys moving up. And again, everybody needs more. Just to put things in a little bit of perspective of what I mean by this, everybody knows that Nick Saban, if you follow college football, he's a DB coach by trade. He's a defensive guy, but he is a DB coach to this day, and he turned 70 on Halloween, I believe it is. He's a Halloween baby. He still coaches DBs and has DB meetings as the head coach at Alabama. Looking at their totals, interceptions this year for the Tide, they have 6, which is not shocking, but they have 1, 2, they have 4 different guys that have 1. They don't have a guy that's just completely standing out per se. It's just that Alabama's defense suffocates people up front. I mean, they just suffocate them. The quarterback's throwing it up for safety almost. If Alabama has that with their defensive talent, it kind of puts things in perspective too, because they've played 4 games. Their DBs only have 4 picks. It's hard. Just want to give that because, I mean, UCF needs to do better, absolutely. But teams now, the way that the offenses are structured, we're going to throw screens and hitches and just get the ball to a really good athlete and see what happens. That's what football has become. Mitigate the chances of turnover, and somehow we're going to make a play that you don't with our athlete being better than yours. That is what the game is. And UCF on offense, by the way, does it as well as anybody. They're tremendous at it, have for years. But UCF, when they have plays, especially like the Bethune game, they got picked apart on 3rd down, and it just, the DBs weren't close enough. That game was probably more problematic for me than the Boise or even the Louisville game. Cunningham has a cannon, by the way. He can really zip it when he wants to. It almost gets him in trouble. But UCF's DBs got to get their hands on more footballs. I've talked about it a lot, but the passing D, while inflated because Bethune didn't try to run, there's no question about that. They have to be able to get their hands on more balls and eventually get more picks. That's just the way it is. I mean, Corey's injured, and we don't know if he's going to play. But I would really like to see a few of the other guys for UCF make a little bit more of an effort to be aggressive. I don't know what they're coaching, so I can't. Maybe they just want them to be kind of close. I don't know, but they're playing some man. They're being aggressive. I like the scheme. I just don't really know if it's a scenario where UCF can get away with that when they start playing teams that have really good quarterbacks. They will dink and dunk you to death. They may only average 6.5 yards per completion, but if it's 3rd down and 1 all day, like, I don't care who your D-line is. You could have Georgia's D-line, which is ridiculous, and you're still going to be in trouble. They've got to get their hands on more. And the player, because I don't know what's going on with Corey, that I'm going to point out the most, because he's got a lot of talent, and he started, is Brown. Devontae Brown, the sophomore, needs to step up. Now, if you could ask me, name one player, offense, defense, special teams, I would put him above Mikey Keene, the quarterback, because I know from talking to people and listening to Gus Malzahn, etc., they can scheme around what his strengths are. They're very good at that. Their offensive staff have total confidence in doing that. and their offensive line is ridiculously good. They'll be fine there. He would be number 2, but number 1 on my board would be Mr. Brown. They've got to be able to go out in a game when they're playing man, because I like what T. Will's doing in terms of his scheme. He mixes up zone and man. We're going to be aggressive. We're going to come after you. Love it. He's got to get his hands on more footballs. He needs to pick off a pass or 2. You have to make the other team fear throwing at one side or the other so you can rotate coverage. This is as old, and it will never change in college football, as you're going to see. And if that happens, well, teams will still probably throw a little bit more because their defense is more geared to stop the run. That's fine. If you get turnovers, it doesn't matter. A handful of years ago, Oklahoma State, they've never been known for defense. But for whatever reason, their linebackers were really active in all phases. Getting involved in the passing game, getting involved in the run game. They would gang tackle. One guy would hold a guy up. The next guy in would flip the ball out with his arm, like just rip at it. They were number 1 or number 2 in the nation in turnovers, and their defense stunk. They didn't stop yardage, but they had something like 26 turnovers they created for the first 10, something like that, sometime in the last 5 years. And I just remember watching them on TV like, this is not that good of a defense. But if you're getting turnovers, and their offense is always good, the mullet, as he likes to be called, the head coach at Oklahoma State, give him a short field, you're in trouble. It's the same thing with Gus Malzahn. UCF needs to get their hands on more passes. Starts with Brown, but it can be anybody. Quadric Bullard's been an absolute tackling machine. I love him in the secondary. That guy just makes plays. Love him doing that. And I've already mentioned Lester. He's a good football player. The guy that I'm curious and I haven't paid enough attention to because I just know he's a good athlete and he can play a lot of different things. If you look at Devod Wilson, he has the most upside probably of any DB, safety or corner. He's played corner at Georgia. You play corner at Georgia to start your career, you're an athlete. They don't recruit anything other than 4- and 5-star players, period. They have a higher ranking than Alabama, for those of you who don't know, in the last few years. If you look at this group, it only takes one of them to really do well, and I picked Brown because he's a corner. But if a safety does really well, you can still adjust with that as well. If he's taking things away, it changes where a team throws the football. They got to locate a certain player pre-snap, meaning the quarterback and the receivers know, hey, this guy's different. Devod could take the next step. It could be somebody else. They have to get a pick to do it, though. So I know I harped on that a lot, but it's a pet peeve of mine. I hate to see a guy as talented as like Devontae. He doesn't have a pick yet, and I'm surprised. He's played pretty good coverage. He's got to get one to go the other direction. Doesn't have to necessarily score a pick 6. Would be nice, but he needs to get his hands on one and take it the other direction. Total defense, this I'm actually okay with. This is where, again, 3 games isn't always the greatest barometer. 354.3 yards per game, 63rd in the country. 2 notes. Boise State game was weird. They got out to a great start. UCF did a phenomenal job of adjusting. That was really good coaching. Bethune, they just out-executed UCF on a lot of little things, and the stats didn't look like what they should because once they got to the red zone, they couldn't run. They couldn't do anything when it even got close to it. But they ate up a lot of passing yards between the 20s, so they're a little iffy. The game that is most inconsistent and concerning is obviously Louisville. I'm not going to harp on it because I went through specific with rushing and passing, but there is one thing with this that is just absolutely, unequivocally mind-blowing. With UCF, if you would have asked me, what's the strength of this team? What's the strength of this team? Going into the season. You're going to say Dylan Gabriel. After that, maybe receiver, possibly. Then it's D-line. They have to be in that conversation. You know how many sacks UCF has? 1. A couple weeks ago, they had Big Cat, and he's a great dude. They had him up for a press conference, and I can't remember what exactly I asked him at the time, but what can you guys do to do better? Just kind of a generic, just whatever you want question, if I remember correctly. He said, sack the quarterback, get him on the ground. That's how we all get paid. And he's 100% right. Well, they've stunk at it. They just have. He's missed at least 3 where he's physically had his hands on the guy. I don't know what the deal is. And he was like mentally and physically, it was obvious he was frustrated with, like he really hard on himself. To a certain degree, that's good. And from just being around him and Kalia and some of the guys they've had up at the podium and for the fall camp media day, etc., these guys take it serious. But their 1 sack is tied for dead last in college football. Dead last. Considering the amount of talent they have in their front 7, and again, Josh Seliskar, he's got the 1 sack. He sacked Cunningham in the Louisville game with 3:39 left in the second quarter. That's how bad they've been at sacks that I remember that. Vanderbilt is tied with them. Vanderbilt is the same team that was down either 35 or 38-0 in the first quarter to Georgia this last week. Georgia is obviously great. Vanderbilt is not, but still, Vanderbilt is pathetic. To be tied with them is not a good stat. This on y'all. It's time to make something happen. You're not going to get a lot of sacks against Navy. That's what you would think. But, excuse me, there's one caveat, and I don't understand this at all. Navy's given up 16 sacks this year because they've gotten behind. If you can do a good job run defense, with the run defense early in the game, their offensive line stinks. It's terrible. Now, here's the question. At what point does Navy feel like, hey, we got to throw it? Are you at 14-3? Is it 21-7? Is it, what point does Ken Niumataloloa say, you know what, we got to throw the football a little bit? They're terrible at it. They can't protect. They have allowed 16 sacks, and they're an option team. They don't throw much. They get sacked about once every 4 times that they drop back. It's pathetic. If we can't get sacks against them, if we get a lead, there's a definitive problem. They need to reboot the whole thing. They need to reboot. And that's a very specific scenario because if it's a close game, they're not going to throw. What I just said goes out the window. You cannot have a situation where you're not getting the quarterback on the ground with the talent that UCF has in their front 7. Can't do it. You have to knock the guy down. You can't just get hands on him. He must go to the ground. UCF has failed at that so far. Some of these stats are just mind-blowing to me. Georgia State has 6 sacks. I know they have some good players, but come on. Middle Tennessee has 6 sacks. Connecticut is awful. They have 7 sacks. This is not good. UCF needs to figure this out because the amount of talent up front does not match the production. Pure and simple. The last thing that I want to mention before getting out of here is just, well, how do you fix things? What do you do? Obviously, they need to tackle better in the backfield. That's just the obvious. When you get hands on guys and they don't go down, that's on the player. It has nothing to do with coaching. That's on the player. Coaches won't say that at the podium. I will. Whether it's Kalia, whether it's Josh, whether it's Big Cat, you name anybody you want. It could be a DB blitzing. It could be Armstrong blitzing. He has to go down. The other thing that they need to do is they need to have a wow play early in the game against Navy. The number of plays that they've given up in their own backfield is just ugly. I mentioned the 16 sacks a minute ago. Horrific. That is unquestioned. They are just terrible up front on offensive line. Maybe they had a deal where they lost like 4 linemen or something last year. I don't know. But there is another statistic, depending on your perspective. I happen to think it's worse for them because they're a running football team. Tackles for loss against an option team are the same as a sack against a team like Bethune-Cookman. So moving forward, if you look at the tackles for loss for Navy, and they've created 14 for themselves, which for them isn't too bad, but they've allowed 28 in 3 freaking games. An option team doing that, when you're just running dive, really basic plays that hit the line quick, that's hard to be that bad. They are atrocious at giving up those plays. That means guys are just literally going scot-free because they run the fullback about a third of the time, if not a little more like 40% of the time. The dude is 2 yards behind the center, about 1.5 yards behind the quarterback. What are y'all doing? So UCF with Klee is really good at shooting the gap. If he is not the defensive player of the game for UCF, my only guess would be because he came out early. In the first half, I'll say he'll be the player of the game. I don't think they can block him at all. But I mean, they 28 tackles for loss, and you're an option team, not a team that's got a 7 yards behind the center tailback. Not that. They have one guy behind the quarterback, and then they have wing backs as a rule. They'll do some other nuances. And remember, again, they're going to run something different against UCF to throw them off. Niamata Lola will not admit that, but I guarantee it. That being stated, Kalia should have 2.5, 3 tackles for loss based on what I'm seeing here. The numbers do not lie. 28 tackles for loss is what Navy has allowed. Their offensive line stinks. Absolutely stinks. I'm curious to see schematically if UCF just plays straight up and out athletes them, which that's probably where I would lean the first couple of plays to see, hey, what are they doing? Let's see if our front four can do what it needs to do. And then the linebackers flow to it. Their linebacker speed's tremendous. Their defense is really set up to stop an option team, to be really honest. Got size up front and you got speed at linebacker, and the safeties know how to tackle. Bullard might lead the team in tackles this game with 15, and that's fine because he's such a good tackler, but the tackles for loss need to come a little bit higher rate this game too. I think that UCF should dominate them, and it's why I think they're going to win going away. It's why I wrote the article saying why UCF should dismantle Navy. That's what I put out yesterday, and I'm full-blown behind that again. After losing to Louisville and after just, that sour taste is going to be in your mouth for a while, but they had a week off. You got to let that go. This is your chance to prove as a defense that we are progressing. It's that simple. Navy's not fun to play, but you need to smack whoever it is in front of you in your next game coming off a loss, regardless of their scheme, and it is the option. Again, it's not fun. Do it anyway. Find a way to be motivated. Find a way to take it out on them. Find a way to play your assignment. However you want to decide to say it, that's what UCF needs to do. And these numbers that I'm talking about, I'll bring these up again next week as UCF prepares for East Carolina, who I don't think is that very good of a team either, but they're prepared for them. Let's see where UCF is next week, especially the rush defense. The pass defense is goofy because they play one team that throws all the time and Navy runs it all the time. But the rush defense, if they can just keep Navy to 200, they should be okay. And the tackles for loss should be the reason they do it. So with that, Brian Smith going to sign off. You all have a great day. Going to be talking a little bit of recruiting today as well. Stinson, the defensive back out of Alabama, probably not going to pick UCF, but he is announcing today. Going to do a recruiting podcast later today, kind of looking at the overall state of Florida. Something I'm going to do a little more consistently. We get into October, it'll be every week. Might do it 2 or 3 times a week, depending on what news is coming. I'm going to do 2 podcasts a day and put them up on the site. But this is kind of the start, because last week recruiting, the coaches were on the road. Now recruiting starts to take shape again. So just wanted to put a little reminder out there. Everybody be safe. Have a great day.